Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Life Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Russell Reynolds, and we got a good show tonight. Got an excellent guest waiting backstage. Before we introduce him, we got to pay the bills. We do have a sponsor now, so we're going to play a commercial here. Make sure you check out these line of children's books. They're good for birthday parties, bedtime stories. They worked really hard on them. You also get um, deals on these books. So be sure to check out the musicnote.net for all these children's books. And we're going to go ahead and play the commercial and then plug some events. And then we will introduce our guest.
I sing out loud, my voice lifts hearts. Tucker House proud when the music starts. Sawyer plays the keys, soul through sound. Carson's guitar shakes the ground. We're the dream team, and we love to sing. Tucker backs us up, he's such an amazing pup. He keeps the rhythm.
And there's the commercial. So definitely check out those books. We'll play it again before the show's over. We're gonna plug a couple of events real quick before we bring our guest on. Come check us out at Mortuary Manor in Toledo, Ohio. Um, May 9th, Mother's Day. Get your tickets through Eclipse Paranormal on Eventbrite. They got two different admissions, VIP admission. That'll get you access to come and investigate with my dad and I, the cousins of the Warrens. Then there's general admission that you can go at your own pace. So get them fast before they sell out. Um, this will be our first time going to Mortuary Manor, so you get to experience the place with us brand new. We've never been there before, so we can see what mysteries we can find together. Also, if your mom's into the paranormal, bring her, get her ticket as well. It'd be a good Mother's Day present. So, with that being said, come on out May 9th and check us out. Um, our next event we're going to be at that we are confirmed is Crypticon KC. This is the first year they are bringing the paranormal to Crypticon KC. They do the paranormal one in their Minneapolis Crypticon, but we are the headliners this year for the paranormal. We will be doing a paranormal panel. So come on out to Crypticon, get your tickets online and get them fast because Crypticon does sell out. It is a big horror movie convention. There'll be a lot of celebrities there, horror movie actors, vendors, you name it, they'll be there. Tattoo artists. So get your tickets fast because they will sell out quick. There's VIP access and general admission. VIP gets you in before the crowd, so you get in 30 minutes early before the crowd does. So, with that being said, get them quick. There's also a VIP dinner with the actors and stuff. So that's on another package to them. So those sell out quick as well. Um, our next event we are confirmed for is West Kentucky Paranormal Expo in Kentucky, September 26th. Um, get your tickets for that. We are one of the guest speakers. My dad and I are. So come on out, talk to us about the Warrens Occult Museum, our research. We will have merch and items for sale, including equipment. We are building equipment now, so we will be selling some stuff. And we got more Paracons in the works. As soon as we got flyers for them, we will be releasing them. So, um, without further ado, we're going to get into the show. We got a great guest tonight. He's all the way from England. Um, he is a best-selling author and wrote the book Joan and Roger Alive in the Afterlife, and he's here to talk to us a little bit about that book and what he's been experiencing in his actual home with the spirits of them, and he'll tell us who they are. Um, we were gonna have him on before, but you know how scheduling conflicts get with us paranormal people. So without further ado, we're gonna bring him on. Jeremy Spillane, welcome to the show.
Hi, Russell. Thanks very much for having me. It's a real honour to be here chatting to you tonight. So,
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to have you.
right,
People saying hello.
yeah, it's great to be here. So, fire away. So let's get talking.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. What inspired you to write the book?
Well, Joan and Roger are my in-laws. So I've been married to Caroline, their elder of two daughters. I've been married to Caroline for over 40 years, and we've got 5 children and 6 grandchildren. So I've known Joan and Roger for around 40 years. So I knew them really well. They were like a second set of parents to me, and obviously, Roger, he was a very highly educated man. He graduated from Oxford University in the UK, and he was a teacher for the first few years of his life. And education and knowledge and books were his whole life, really. They were his main things, the most important things to him in his life, basically. And so Joan and Roger met when they were young. They both were churchgoers, Jehovah's Witnesses, actually. So they both met through the church, and they fell in love, got married, and then they had two daughters, Caroline the elder, Alison the younger. She was a couple of years younger. And once the daughters arrived, they stopped going to church, apparently. So I think, the pressure of work and everything else, having the young children, maybe that stopped them going. And Roger basically stopped believing in all the religious teachings that he'd had. So he stopped believing in the afterlife and all the other aspects of it. And so when I met him and got to know him, then if ever I talked about this subject, I can't remember how often it came up, not that often, but occasionally. And he would always tell me, there's no such thing as the afterlife. Once you're dead, that's it. And he had this view right up until the time he died in 2022. So he was obviously still open to the idea of the afterlife. And after he died, we saw that he had books on different religions, and I think he was still searching for proof that there was an afterlife, but he hadn't found it. So right up till the day he died, he didn't believe in the afterlife, and so he lived his life on that basis. He was trying to cram everything into this physical life before he died. He was very full of energy, had lots of ideas, plans, and that in the earlier years before Joan was less mobile, when she was more active, they used to go away on holidays, abroad, and places, used to like sightseeing in all sorts of countries. And, Roger liked that type of thing, and he liked jazz music. He read countless books, and he was always wanting to, I suppose, educate himself. He set up a thing in the town where they lived here in East Yorkshire. It's called the University of the Third Age. I don't know if you have that in the US, but it's older, generally retired people who have maybe weekly meetings, and they get a guest speaker in on all sorts of subjects. And, they just like hearing the speaker talk, and they like the knowledge, basically. And Roger set this up in his local town, and for 20 years he used to do that amongst all the other things he used to do once he'd retired from his job. So, as I say, education and knowledge were everything to Roger. But Roger had always had a lot of health problems over the years, and he'd got through them all. He'd had some major problems. He had a triple heart bypass operation, some decades before he died, and he got through that. So I think it was always felt by everyone, Roger included, and everyone around, that Roger would die first, but actually Joan died first. And so in 2017, Joan just died very suddenly and totally without warning, and it took us all by surprise. So at that time, Karen and I were living in West Yorkshire. We were about 30 miles away from Joan and Roger in East Yorkshire. And late one Saturday night, Karen got a phone call from her dad, and he said to Karen, he said, "I think Mum's gone." And Karen didn't really know what he meant initially, and then it dawned on her that he was saying that Joan had died, and he thought Joan had died, although it was obviously pretty definite. So we rushed over, and it was a terrible journey over. It was freezing weather, and the motorway was shut, and we had detours. Anyway, we eventually got to the house, and the ambulance was there. Luckily, it come really quickly, and the paramedics were there with Joan, but it was obvious that she had died instantly without warning. So Joan and Roger had been sat in their living room, and Joan had just started to get up out of her chair, and she instantly collapsed on the floor and died, not able to say a word, not able to say goodbye. And so it was obviously a massive shock for everyone, Roger and
Right.
Caroline and me and Caroline's sister Alison and her husband Colin. It was a shock for everyone, and we were there, and we went, and Joan was on the floor, and we were with her for a couple of hours till the ambulance people finished doing what they were doing, and the police were called because it was a sudden death. And anyway, obviously they knew quickly that it was just a medical issue, and then Joan could be taken to the funeral home. So as I say, we were all in shock, and it was just a terrible thing. And it obviously, you never expect your parents to die, even if you can see they're ill, perhaps. But Joan hadn't been particularly ill, as far as we knew. We knew she had a heart problem, but she didn't make much of it. It was always Roger who tended to talk about his health issues, and Joan was, a bit more reserved. So it was a big shock for us all. So amazingly, Karen and I, within a day or two, can't remember exactly, certainly with less than 2 days later, after Joan died, we got signs at our house that Joan was still around. We had all sorts of amazing things happen, and we were in our mid to late 50s age-wise, and we'd been together 40 years, and we'd never had any experience from any previous family members who'd died, that we'd never had any signs at all to indicate that there is an afterlife. So actually my beliefs were actually very similar to Roger's. I've been brought up a Catholic by my dad, along with my two older brothers. We all were taken to church every week on a Sunday until we were all in our mid-teens, and then we each stopped going to church at this point. And from my point of view, I stopped believing in the Catholic teaching, so I didn't believe in an afterlife either, like Roger didn't. I thought the concept of afterlife was just too incredible, too unbelievable, and I'd never experienced anything that convinced me otherwise. And at school, I sort of studied science subjects, and I did reasonably well at the sciences, and I had planned to go to university, but that didn't happen in the end because my maths let me down. And I met Caroline, and then I started work at that point, and I didn't go to university, although I did start a course briefly, but it wasn't the course for me. So my scientific training or education, I suppose you'd say, made me think along the lines of most scientists, these days in the Western world. It's all materialist teaching. So if you can't measure it and get it in a laboratory, then it doesn't exist, basically, is the general scientific view. I know there are niche scientists who looking into everything paranormal and such like. But the general view of science seems to be that, the afterlife and spirits, all that isn't real because they can't deal with it, they can't measure it. So that was my thinking, that I hadn't witnessed anything to convince me of the afterlife myself, and I didn't believe it. Although I was like Roger, I was open to persuasion. Had I experienced something personally, I would have believed it, but I never did. So I spent 40 odd years of my life thinking there's no afterlife, and nothing had convinced me of anything different until Joan died in 2017, and then suddenly got all these signs from her, and I believed then in the afterlife. So I was totally convinced then. So,
So,
anyway,
what first convinced you that Joan and Roger were still present after death, rather than these experiences being a coincidence or a grief response?
well, as I say, within 1 or 2 days at the most, certainly probably 1 day or so after Joan died, suddenly Caroline and I were getting all these signs at our house that Joan was still around. So we had televisions throughout our house. We had probably 4 televisions, something like that, in various rooms in the house. We ran a food shop and we lived over the premises, and so we had various televisions that would suddenly turn on by themselves, and they'd never done this before. So skeptics might say, "Oh, you've just got a faulty television," but you don't suddenly get 4 faulty televisions at the same time. And so Joan was turning these on, at various times. Sometimes when we walked in a room in our house where the television was, it would turn on as we walked into the room. But the main one, I suppose, was the one in our bedroom. So that started turning on often in the middle of the night. So we might actually be asleep, and then suddenly the television has turned itself on, and our bedside light had turned on in the middle of the night, and it would wake us up from our sleep, and it was a big surprise. And we sort of almost straight away, Karen and I, realised that's Joan telling us that she's there, and we actually loved that. We thought, this is amazing, well done, Joan. And we're sort of talking to her and saying, that's you, isn't it? And as with any signs from the afterlife now, looking back, it seems that if you acknowledge the sign, then you get more signs, which is great. So we didn't find it scary at all. Some people might think, God, that's scary, but to us it wasn't scary. We knew it was her, and she was only doing it from a point of view of love and wanting to reassure us, I think, that she was there, and it was fantastic. But as soon as we got these signs, obviously we tried telling Roger about them. We've had these amazing signs and we think it's Joan. And Roger didn't believe in the afterlife, and he obviously still didn't. And when we told him what had happened to us, he didn't say anything. He didn't know what to say. He had a strange half grin, on his face, sort of didn't know what to make of us, and he just thought we were total nutcases. I'm sure that's what he thought. So, after a couple of attempts of trying to talk to him about it, we sort of didn't say anymore. And from his reaction, we were almost certain that he can't have been getting these signs himself. Had Joan tried.
He probably did. If he had that look on his face, he was probably experiencing some stuff at his home too.
You think so? Right.
Yeah, she was probably visiting him as well because she loved him. So she's going to go back to the people that she loved and visit.
Yeah, we wondered that, but on the other hand, he had his own heart problems, and I wondered if she gave him some signs like she was giving us, would that have given him a heart attack and finished him off? So I wonder whether she didn't give him signs, but maybe she did. We'll never know, obviously. But if she did give him the signs, yeah, that might explain his strange expression. But he maintained with us when we tried to talk to him about it that he still didn't believe in the afterlife, and he seemed to sort of have that belief. But as I say, it's too late to be sure now. And as far as we know, then Karen's sister Alison we don't think she got any signs either. But again, we're not totally sure. We've never asked her directly, I don't think, but she's never told us she's had any signs. So Alison seemed to be almost as skeptical as her dad, and thinking that Karen and I were being a bit, sort of slightly imagining things. Maybe, I'm not quite sure, but they didn't seem totally convinced. Anyway, we didn't talk about it a lot more after that, really. So we still got these signs from Joan for the next few months and years, even, although the number of signs did decrease a bit, and but we still got them after a while, and even now we get them occasionally, and we think they're still from Joan. So the other signs from Joan were, as I say, we had the televisions and the bedside lights and things, but my favourite signs were actually animals and things. I've always been keen on birds and had a reasonable knowledge of birds. And 4 days after Joan had died, Caroline, myself, and our pet spaniel Poppy, who's featured heavily in the book because she was very key to all sorts of things at this time. Anyway, the three of us were walking around a local ancient castle near where we lived called Sandal Castle, and it was hundreds of years old, and the castle was surrounded by a big earth mound, a massive fortification, and this earth mound is covered in grass, and there were just one or two smallish trees partway down this grassy slope, and we're walking around the top where there's a footpath, and suddenly I see a little bird of prey in this smallish tree, and it's perched in the tree. And I said to Karen, I'm just going to walk towards that bird of prey and just see what it is, because I couldn't quite tell from the distance we were at initially. And as I start walking towards this bird of prey, it flies out of the tree towards the three of us, and it circles us twice at very low level in tight circles, and then it goes back to the tree and perches again. And it was a female kestrel, which is a small bird of prey. I don't know if you have them in the US. It's about the size of a pigeon, and it's normal prey is like small mice and things like that. So the fact it circled us wasn't the normal behavior at all of a wild animal. And some skeptics have said, could it have been just eyeing up our dog, thinking that might be a tasty meal? But our dog was a medium-sized dog, 15 kilos in weight, 30 odd pounds in weight. So there's no way on earth that this kestrel could have thought that it have a meal with our dog. So it was definitely a sign from Joan, and I was amazed and never had anything like that since. And that's still my favourite sign. And Joan has also done some amazing signs with butterflies, which I know is comparatively common with spirits. So the best sign from Joan with butterflies, although she's done a number, but the best was actually a few years after she'd died. It was actually after Roger had died, and we were in the cemetery where they're both buried together now. And we were leaving the cemetery, and that morning we'd watched a program on telly about signs from the afterlife, things like butterflies and other things. And I'd already seen this program, and I told Karen, I said, you need to watch this program. It's fascinating about signs. There's some amazing stories in it, I said. And we'd watched the program. Then we'd gone to the cemetery shortly after watching the program. And as we were leaving the cemetery, after having been to their grave and done whatever we were doing that day, we were heading out the cemetery. And as we were getting towards the exit for the cemetery, Caroline was saying out loud to her mum, she said, Mum, if you are around, just give us a sign, and we'd love to see it. And then suddenly we realised that we were in the middle of a whole load of butterflies. There were 20 or 30 red admiral butterflies, which happens to be the one she always seemed to give us a sign with. And there were 20 or 30 of these butterflies on several gravestones and in some of the bushes at the side of the cemetery, near the fence. And we didn't see these butterflies appear, we didn't see them fly in and arrive, and we were there watching them for a minute or so. Caroline took some still photos of them actually, and then suddenly we realised they'd gone, and we didn't see them fly off either. So that was one of Joan's amazing signs. So yeah, it's the wildlife signs that I particularly like. But yeah, the electronics, the televisions and that, Joan could do a lot. So as I say, we tried talking to Roger about these things, but he wouldn't talk about it. So Roger seemed to still not believe in the afterlife after Joan had died, and then Karen and I decided we'd move over to be near to Roger because we lived 30 miles away, but we had this business and it was a bit of a millstone, and we decided to sell up our home and business and move near to Roger, and that's what we did. And so we were able to move to within just a few miles of him in a nearby town to where he lived, and we were able to then come here and semi-retire, and we were then able to visit Roger every day really when he was at home, and just sort of, it helped support us and it helped support him, we think. And so it was nice to come over here and be near him. And then we got COVID, as the whole world did, and that was a nightmare, of course. We had all these rules and regulations, and I know you had it bad in America as well, but in our country we had these really strict rules, and you couldn't visit people in their houses and that, and you had to keep your distance. And so because Roger was older, he was in his 80s at this point, then we were allowed to visit him as carers, family carers, and everyone in the country during these lockdowns, we were allowed one bit of daily exercise out the house each day. So we used to drive in our car with our dog, and we'd go to our local park and give the dog a good long walk, and then we would drive on to Roger's house and visit and see if he needed anything from the shops or whatever. And then Karen and I would perhaps sneak a drink in the house with him when we shouldn't have done, possibly, but we couldn't be sat outside in the freezing cold weather, when it's winter, whatever it was. And so we used to break the rules, but we did that knowing that we needed to we needed to keep everyone's sanity and stop ourselves from, going around the bend, because it was like mental torture for everyone, wasn't it? And
especially the lockdowns and everything. Even here in America, it kicked up a lot of energy and activity for the paranormal wise, and most teams stopped during COVID. We're one of the teams that didn't. We stayed right through going through COVID, and it really a lot of activity with everybody cooped up in houses and on lockdown. At each other's throats. So we picked up even the darker stuff because they were at each other's throats all the time. And but
I suppose so.
Have you tried any equipment communication with Joan and Roger?
Yeah. So what happened was, as I say, Joan died first, and so Roger died about 4 years after Joan, just over 4 years later. But before Roger died, actually, Caroline couldn't visit her mum's grave for a year or more. It was so traumatic for Caroline, she just didn't do that. But after a while, she got to the point where she could visit her mum's grave. So we used to go and we'd take the dog and we'd walk around the cemetery. And then nearer the time that Roger died, we used to walk in the cemetery, and we're walking in a cemetery that wasn't the one where Joan was, and that wasn't the one where Roger was going to join her, of course. So we're walking in a cemetery in our town with our dog, and Karen spotted in this cemetery there was just a bird having a bath in the water that was in the headstone of a grave of someone, and the rain had filled up this little recess in the grave where you'd normally have a little vase with flowers in, and this blackbird was having a bath in the water. And Caroline thought, oh, that's a nice thing, and she decided to video it on her phone. So she did.
Sorry, guys. You must be having internet issues. But definitely check out his books, Joan and Roger Alive in the Afterlife. And he talks about the paranormal stuff they've experienced.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Oh, you're locked up again. Yeah, so he must be still having internet issues. We'll go through some comments here. I had doubts about the afterlife until my father died, and I felt I needed to believe so I could keep him with me. When we were at the church preparing his funeral, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I thought it was someone behind me. I looked, but there was no one there, and I knew then it was my father. He continues to visit me quite often. I lost my dad in November. He's been active at my house. Yep, sorry guys, we lost our guest. He's way in England, so I don't know how the internet is over there. Um, but yeah, I mean, I lost my mom to cancer, and we have him back. There we go.
Can you hear me now, Russell? Are you there?
Yep, I can hear you good.
All right. So yeah, that was a bit of a pain, wasn't it? So anyway,
Yeah, technology. It happens.
yeah, you know, it's clever, but when it goes wrong, it's very frustrating. But never mind.
So, what kind
So
of equipment do you use to communicate with
well, initially we were just using mobile phones and we were videoing because I don't know if you heard any of the story I was saying, but we saw this blackbird at a cemetery nearby, and Caroline videoed it because it was a interesting thing to look at, and we thought there was a light anomaly in front of it, but later I realized it was just a reflection in the camera lens. But whatever the reason, it made us start using our iPhones to video whenever we were at Joan and Roger's at the cemetery where they were buried. And this, we actually started videoing before Roger died. So some months before he died, Karen saw this blackbird, and we started recording on our iPhones when we were at the cemetery, just in case of anything. And I would then look at the footage later when we got home and see if there was anything strange or not. And you know, a few times I noticed little light anomalies.
them?
And so Roger died in 2022, and as soon as he died, we went to Joan's grave because Roger was going to be buried next to him. So we had to do some things. There were some things on the grave which we needed to remove before his funeral, so that the funeral could go ahead okay. And the main thing there was a potted plant. It was a rose bush in a pot. So Caroline was videoing me as I removed this and put it in a wheelbarrow to get it out the cemetery. And when we got home and we looked at the footage of this, it was strange because the video was on half speed. It had been recorded in slow motion, and she hadn't selected that. So I then thought, well, that's a bit odd. And I thought, well, maybe Roger's chosen to do that to the iPhone because as soon as Roger died, actually, we did have various signs and we realized they were from him. And we had electrical signs at our house, which weren't the same as what Joan had given us at the previous house. These signs were things like the power turning off in the house sometimes, or a circuit tripping out. You know, the circuit breakers in the fuse box would just trip out with quite a bang sometimes, especially if all the power went off in one go, which it did sometimes. And so we knew Roger was sending us signs as soon as he had died. And so looking at this video on the iPhone at his grave, or what was to become his grave, this was just a few days after he had died, before his funeral. So looking at this rose that I was removing, the video was on half speed. And when I studied the video carefully after a few weeks, I didn't spot it initially. I saw that there were lots of what looked like little flies around the rose. And I thought, this is strange, because I don't remember seeing any flies when I was at the cemetery, because it looked like quite a lot of them. And I thought, well, if this rose had been surrounded by flies, I would have spotted them when I was dealing with it, but I didn't. And then looking hard and zooming in on each fly, I realized they weren't physical flies, but they were some sort of little light anomaly type things flying around. And some were black and they would instantly turn to white, and some were white that turned to black. And they would just suddenly appear and then suddenly disappear. And, sort of studying them very carefully, each one on screen, and playing the video back numerous times, I could see they were just appearing and disappearing in a strange way, and they seemed to be coming into and out of this soil around the rose. And I read something about spirit flies, so I thought, well, I couldn't read the details about these spirit flies, but I thought, well, that must be what these are actually that I'm looking at. And I concluded myself that maybe these are each fly, possibly spirit fly, is a soul, a spirit that's maybe come for Roger before his funeral, like relatives coming for someone when they die. And I thought that's what I thought this was. So that was amazing. So for the next 6 or 7 months, we just used iPhones, and I did study every bit of footage that we took when we were at the cemetery or wherever, where we thought that something might happen. And a number of times I did spot light anomalies on the footage, which I couldn't explain as reflections or any other sort of ordinary lights. And I concluded that was probably Roger trying to sort of communicate with us. But Caroline was saying to me throughout this time, why don't I get some ghost hunting equipment? Because since Joan had died, I've been watching all the ghost hunting programs and shows, really to see what equipment worked. I didn't like the way ghost hunters always did it at night, because I knew I couldn't do that. I was still slightly scared of the dark, and I was frightened of all the bad things that can happen when you use equipment and try and talk to any spirit. I didn't want to do any of that. But eventually Caroline persuaded me, and I said, okay, I'll get some ghost hunting equipment maybe, but if I do, I'll only use it to try and find your parents as spirits, and that's all I will do. I won't sort of look for any other spirits at all, any other conventional ghosts, and I'll only do it in the daytime or in bright light conditions. I'm not going to do it in the dark. That would be too much for me. So that's what we did. So the first bit of equipment I got actually was this K2 meter, which you might see here just to the side of me. And I got this K2 meter because, as you well know, they're sort of widely used in ghost hunting, and they seem to be very effective, and they're only cheap. But I said to Caroline, I'll only get good equipment, because if it doesn't work, if we don't find them, I'll never know if it's because I've got cheap equipment that's not very good anyway. So I said, we'll get the good stuff, and if we still don't find your mum and dad, then we can sell the equipment and maybe recoup our money. So I got this K2 meter, which they were only cheap. It was about £40 new, about $50 or so. And as soon as we took this to the cemetery, to their grave, and we turned it on, I started talking. I saying, are you there, Roger? And this meter's flashing away like mad, right up into the red a lot. And seemed to be able to have a conversation with him and saying, that's you, Roger, isn't it? And he'd flashed the K2, into the red, and seemed to be able to have a real chat with him. And their grave is hundreds of yards from the main road. There's no electricity in the cemetery, no lights of any sort, electric lights or anything like that. So any reactions on this K2, I was sure were spirits, and I was certain it was Roger talking to me. And Roger had always loved electronic gadgets, so it was actually entirely appropriate that he would try and use electronic things to communicate with us. And we knew that he was, fiddling with our iPhones, doing various things and other electronic signs we were getting from him. And Joan had done the television, so it's well known that spirits can affect electronics particularly, and electrical stuff generally. So yeah, that they seem to have an ability to do that, don't they? So yeah, we had the K2 meter, and Roger's sort of talking to us effectively with that. So at the cemetery, saying to him, right, I'm planning to get 2 other bits of equipment, and if it works, might be able to see you on this special SLS camera, and also planning to get an Ovilus 3, which I'd seen the camera and the Ovilus 3 working well in ghost hunting programs, so this is what I decided I would get. And even though the Ovilus was obsolete even then, and they didn't make them anymore, they seemed to be people's favourites at that time, I thought. And so I thought, well, if anything's going to work, it'll be that. So we ordered these 2 things from America, the Ovilus being second hand, and the camera was sort of new, but it was, I don't know, it was the best I could find. And this was around the time, after COVID. So things like these were all in quite high demand. So it was very expensive. The Ovilus cost me nearly £1,000, around $1,000 or more from America. And the SLS camera, that was just a few hundred, I can't remember. But I ordered them both from America, and then a couple of weeks later they arrived. They both arrived on the same day. So I took them to the cemetery one day. Caroline was working that day, but I took them, and it was December. It was a hard winter, freezing cold. I took the dog with me because we would take the dog to the cemetery, and she was like almost our excuse for having the equipment there. We could have it hidden in the dog's pushchair, because by this stage the dog was elderly and she couldn't always walk. She'd had a stroke on the day before Roger's funeral, and we thought we were going to lose her, and luckily we didn't. She lived for another 10 months, but some days she couldn't walk, so we had a pushchair for her, and I could have all the equipment in the pushchair. And then if I was to see anyone else at the cemetery, which was rare, but it did happen, we could just keep the equipment hidden, because I didn't want to upset anyone with having equipment in the cemetery. They might think I was a nutcase. And in fact, that was the joke we had with Roger when I got the K2 meter, that we were talking to him at the grave, and then Caroline said, oh, you better put that away, there's people coming in the cemetery. And so we joked with Roger, oh, we need to turn this off now, Roger, we don't want anyone thinking we're nutcases. And then he flashes the K2 meter wildly, as if to agree, yes, that's right, we don't want people thinking you're nutcases. So anyway, when the SLS and the Ovilus had arrived, went to the cemetery on this freezing day and turned them on, and then straight away at the grave, I can see what I think is Roger on the SLS camera at his grave. So he's showing up as a green stick figure on the SLS camera at his grave, and he was there for all the time virtually. I had the camera on, so more than 20 minutes I had it on, and I was talking to him, and I was overwhelmed. I couldn't believe it, and I was sort of almost in tears, because I thought, this is incredible. And I was saying, I can't believe it's you. It is, isn't it? And he's saying the odd word on the Ovilus that makes me think, yeah, he's actually using the Ovilus to talk as well. Some words he'd come out with, and I think, what does he mean with that? And you think, well, I don't understand that. Maybe he's got the word by mistake, or maybe I just don't follow. But every now and again he'd say a word, and I think, oh yeah, he's actually trying to communicate with me, or is communicating with me. So as I say, Caroline was at work, and it was freezing cold, and after 20 odd minutes I said, sorry Roger, I'm going to have to turn the equipment off, even though I know you're there, but we'll come back in a couple of days when Caroline can come, and next time we come, can you see if you can bring Joan with you? Because at this point, I'd only seen the one spirit there. So I was certain that was him. So anyway, 2 days later, we come back, Karen and I, and the dog, of course, and turn the equipment on. And Roger didn't show up straight away, but then after a little while of looking, suddenly he's there. And then within a few minutes, suddenly there's another spirit on the camera there. There's two of them, and I realised he has brought Joan with him. So at this point, because we've been filming with the iPhones, since before Roger had died, once I'd got this equipment, I just carried on. So every time I had the equipment on, I would always film it with the iPhone, film the equipment, and also, the general scene. I could move the iPhone around independently, so I could look at the, where we were, the cemetery, but then I'd show the equipment with the iPhone. And so, like you can see here, you can see the K2 flashing. So I'd have the K2 and the Ovilus quite close together, filming them, and then the SLS slightly beyond, and I'd get them all shot, and then whatever happened, then we've got a record of it. And I decided that I knew that I needed to save all these videos very carefully. I didn't want anything getting lost, because I might want to look back at these videos. So anyways, just before Christmas we'd been, and we saw Joan and Roger at the cemetery, and again that was amazing, and Caroline was very impressed. I should just say, the first time when I went by myself and the dog and saw Roger, I was overwhelmed, and I rang Caroline straight away as we left and said, you'll never believe it, your dad was there on camera. And she was sort of impressed, but Karen was still a bit skeptical, I think. But I think she maybe agreed that it might be him. And we told Karen's sister that day as well, and she and her husband Colin came over that night, and we showed them the footage, and I said, it's amazing, isn't it? And I'm not sure if they believed it or not, but they sort of went along with it. So it was all very momentous, this. So every time I turned the equipment on, we would see them on camera, or see Roger on camera, and sometimes Joan would be there as well. But Roger seemed to be the main one who was there. And as I say, I filmed every time, and so we started building up quite a number of videos, and I was turning the camera on a few times a week at this point. And then over time, I perhaps would only have the camera on maybe once a week on average. But we built up a lot of videos, and after a while, just a few weeks after starting with these videos, and I was amazed. And Roger was still showing up every time I turned it on, and I was storing these videos, saving them. But I realized that the Ovilus, although he was coming out with the odd word that was really relevant, and the best one of that actually was about a week after I got the equipment. Alison and her husband Colin came round for a meal, New Year's Day, I think it was. So like about a week or so after we'd got the equipment, they came round to us on New Year's Day for a meal, and I said, I'll turn the equipment on and I'll see if your dad appears, and if he does, then you, Alison, can perhaps meet him, while he's on the SLS camera. And that's what happened. So I had a meal, and I had the equipment on, and I was looking around, then suddenly I can see the spirit that I know is Roger. So I said, Alison, come over, and your dad's here. Do you want to see if you can perhaps touch his hand or whatever? And I said, if you hold your hand out, you might just feel him slightly. Some people say that if there's a spirit around, you can sometimes feel a slight tingle, and Karen had thought she had felt that when she'd be her dad while he's on camera. So Alison came, and I said, your dad's there, just hold out your hand. And so they appeared to be touching hands on the screen, and she wasn't sure if she could feel him or not, but I said, I'm sure that's your dad. And I said, Roger, can you say something on the Ovilus to acknowledge that you're there, that it's you, basically? And so anyway, as soon as I said that, he says the word alley on the Ovilus, which is Alley. Now, this was just the right word, because he always called Alison Ali. He never called her Alison, although he spelt it differently. He spelt it A-L-I. in the Ovilus database of over 2,000 words, there isn't the word Alison at all. There's no Alison in there. And the only word that was suitable was Alley, Alley. So that's the only Alley of any spelling in the Ovilus. And he used it instantly that I asked. So that to me was 100% proof that that's Roger sort of communicating with us and telling us that he's there. So anyway, even though he does use some very good words occasionally, and you think, yeah, that's exactly the right word. So I know that's him selecting that word, but it's still not a proper conversation, of course. And at this point, I realized that I was going to get in touch with some mediums, try and get a medium to help us to perhaps give us a reading with Roger, and while I'm using the equipment. And so I started contacting some mediums, on the internet and that, trying to get someone to help me. And I had some responses from some mediums that were really negative and saying, you really shouldn't be doing this. You're doing some terrible things. You might be trapping your in-laws here on Earth and they'll become trapped spirits. You should just leave them be, sort of things, so that they can go on to wherever they're supposed to be in the afterlife. And I was really quite worried, and I've been reading lots of books, on all subjects. I've been reading various books by mediums about the afterlife and everything else. And there did seem to be some mediums who thought that you could cause the spirits harm, you could trap them. And a lot of mediums also seem to say that spirits stop showing up after a couple of years. So I always had this feeling that I needed to do whatever I was doing, my investigations, I need to keep doing them fairly quickly in case Joan and Roger stopped showing up at all to us. I wanted to make the most of the opportunity while they were showing up. But anyway, luckily I got in touch with one very helpful medium who was quite close to us where we lived. And she was very positive. She was familiar with all this equipment because she does normal ghost hunting as well as being an excellent medium. And she said, what you're doing is fine. You're not going to trap them. They only come because they want to. And I was so relieved at that. And anyway, we went over to her house and had a reading with her while I had the equipment on. So we went in the room where we were going to have the meeting, have the meeting with her, and Caroline was with me, and we turn on the equipment, and then Roger's there in the room waiting while she makes us some coffees. And so for a few minutes we're chatting to Roger on camera, and he's showing up on the SLS. And then as Ali Mather walks in the room with the coffees, suddenly Roger's spirit seems to disappear into her. And I said, oh, Ali, it's a shame. He was there until you came in the room, then he's disappeared. He's sort of gone into you, it seemed. And she said, oh, that's a good thing, actually. It means he's blended with me. So it means that hopefully we'll get a good reading, which we did. And she came out with a fantastic reading, and she was able to describe all his various illnesses, his medical conditions and that. And then when she's describing them, at various points, when there were really serious things that finished him off, he's flashing this K2 meter really strongly, as if to say, yes, I agree, that's exactly right, sort of thing. And it was a fantastic reading with Ali Mather. And anyway, around this sort of time, soon after meeting her, at this point, I realized, I'm getting some good help from mediums like Ali, which is fantastic. And I should just say, actually, that there's another medium who we tried to get to help us, but he wouldn't do one-to-ones. He only does public shows, and he's a local medium to us. He's in England, and he's in Yorkshire, but he travels the country, and he travels abroad as well, doing shows. He's really good, and he's called Stephen Holbrook. Now,
yeah, I've heard of him.
Have you heard of him? Oh, that's good. He's an excellent medium, and we were actually recommended to him by Caroline's sister, Alison, her husband, Colin. Now, some years before Roger died, Colin's dad had died, and Colin was looking in the local newspaper and saw an advert for this medium, Stephen Holbrook, coming to a show near him. And Colin had never heard of Stephen Holbrook, and I don't think he'd even ever experienced a medium before, but just after his dad had died, he saw this advert in the newspaper and thought, I ought to go and see this medium just in case my dad comes through with a message. So he went to this show of Stephen Holbrook's, never having heard of him before. And Colin's dad did come through with an amazing message, apparently, really accurate. So Colin had recommended Stephen Holbrook to us. So Karen and I had seen him a few times before Roger had died, but we'd never had any personal readings for us. But we could see at his shows that he was good, and people who did have readings, relatives come through, you could tell that they were convinced it was a really accurate reading. So 3 weeks after Roger died, actually, this Stephen Holbrook was performing near us. And we'd been planning to go anyway, but when Roger died, I said to Karen, look, I know your dad's only just died and it might be hard for everyone, but I think we ought to go and see him just in case your dad does come through with a message. So we decided we would go to this show. So Karen and I and her sister Alison and her husband Colin, the four of us went to this show. And at this show, Stephen came through with an amazing message from Roger, and it was so spot on. It was incredible. So that was the first personal message we'd ever had from a medium at one of these Stephen Holbrook shows. And it was definitely Roger, there's no question. So some of the things that he said through Stephen were that Caroline was the only one with Roger in the hospital when he died. She was holding his hand, and that was true. Caroline had been with Roger as he was dying. The nurse had rung Caroline and said, you perhaps want to come to the hospital. She didn't make anything of it, didn't say you need to get in now. She just said, oh, you might want to come down if you can. And Caroline did, and thought, well, that's a bit odd. You know, she's not saying I need to go quickly. But anyway, she went. It was quite early in the morning. And Roger did die while she was there holding his hand. So Caroline rang me and said, you know, Dad's died. And so me and Alison and Colin, we all went down to the hospital and joined her. So the medium, Stephen Holbrook, says that Caroline was holding his hand when he died, and then the three others of us joined him at the hospital, which is true. Another thing he said through Stephen Holbrook was when Roger left his house a few days before he died and went to the hospital in the ambulance, as he was leaving his house, he asked the ambulance people if they'd moved 3 new climbing plants he had in his porch. He got them to move these into the garden so they'd get some rain and they wouldn't die, you know, they'd be watered while he was in hospital, which is what happened. The ambulance guy did put them in the garden, and he said this through the medium, that was true. So Karen and I got these plants and we were looking after them, and they were doing well. Another thing he said was that Roger had been buried in his coffin with the wrong shoes, and that was true. Alison couldn't find the black shoes that she was planning for him to be dressed in, and he ended up being buried with some brown shoes which didn't match his suit, but that was true. And another thing the medium said, you know, Roger's message through Stephen Holbrook was, you know, in my coffin I had a few books with me, and that's right. So Alison and Karen had selected some books and put them in the coffin with him, as he was such a book fanatic. He needed some books. So this amazing message from Stephen Holbrook was 100% accurate, and there were other things in there as well. It was incredible. So yeah, we'd had these 2 mediums now give us some amazing readings, and around this time I realized that I was going to have to write a book about all this. I'd never written a book before, and I'd never thought I ever would write a book. There was nothing in the world I thought I'd going to be able to write a book about. I knew what a hell of a lot of work it was, and I just didn't think that was me. But everything Roger was doing, having followed on from Joan with all her signs, he was telling me, you know, I need you to write a book. And he's saying, you know, I was wrong, there is an afterlife, and I need you to get my story out there. And so this is what happened. So I wrote the book, and Caroline somehow spotted this publisher who gave me a deal, you know, offered me the publishing contract to write the book and publish it, which they did. And this is a publisher who specializes in spiritual and paranormal books. So it was the perfect publisher for this book. So I started writing it, and actually the first medium, Ali Mather, was the one who kept saying to me, you're going to write this book. I can see that you'll do it. And, Roger is helping you. He's planning it all. And she said, it's going to be successful, sort of thing. And so I started writing the book. And after a few chapters, I was struggling, really. And Ali Mather sent me a video to watch. It's called The Secret, and it's about visualizing what you want. And if you visualize it enough and really imagine yourself being successful, then it will happen. And I kept visualizing this book being finished, and eventually it did happen. So we had help along the way, of course. Caroline's best friend in Australia, who was an English teacher, she offered to edit the book for us. And at one point, she came over to this country to visit Caroline, and while she was over, she really inspired me, because I'd written about 3 chapters of the book, and I was thinking, oh, this isn't working. I'm not really getting where I need to go with it. And with all the videos we had, there needed to be pictures or whatever in the book, and I wasn't sure how to do that. It just didn't seem to be making sense to me, how I was going to incorporate video and photographs or whatever. But suddenly I realized that if I had a QR code on the cover of the book, then people could access the videos via the QR code, and they could see the videos on YouTube channel, but I wouldn't need to put any pictures actually in the book. So that's what happened. So each chapter of the book, there's a video associated with virtually every chapter, and the chapter in the book describes what you're seeing in the video. And so people can read the book without watching any videos if they want. They won't sort of lose anything. But if they do watch the video as well, then it all sort of adds together, and they can read the description of what's going on in the video, what the key points. So that's how it's happened. So anyway, this friend of Caroline's in Australia inspired me, and she came over just before our summer holidays, and Caroline and I both work part-time now as school bus drivers, so we get school holidays, which is fantastic. So because we're only part-time workers, we've got time and energy to do things like write the book and such like. So I spent the rest of the summer holidays after Joe had visited us in England. I spent the rest of the time writing the rest of the book, and it all sort of spilled out of me, and it was all pretty much okay. Joe didn't have to do a lot with the editing. Apparently it all just basically made sense. So I knew that Roger was sort of writing the book through me. So although it's just my name on the front cover of the book as the author, I had wanted Roger as a co-author on the book cover, but that was the one thing that Caroline's sister Alison didn't want. She didn't want her dad's name on the book as a co-author for some reason. I didn't understand why, because she was happy with everything else about the book, and which surprised me, but I couldn't understand why she didn't want her dad's name there. But that's a minor point. So although it's my name on the book, it's a real team effort. There's a whole load of us involved. Joan and Roger obviously planning it from the world, and then there's us here on Earth doing it, and we've all come together, and it's all an amazing thing. So if anyone is interested, then it is actually available now on Amazon or anywhere else that sells books. You can pre-order the book, and when it's published at the end of April, beginning of May, you'll get it delivered. But there it is on your screen there. And I should just say that front cover, that was another minor point. I had wanted Joan and Roger's actual photograph on the cover, but the publishers wouldn't do that. And I don't quite understand why, but never mind. But everything else is what I wanted. And that picture you can see on the cover of the SLS camera and 2 stick figures, that is the actual photograph of the SLS camera with Joan and Roger's spirits showing up for the first time that we ever saw them on camera at their cemetery, at their grave. So that isn't a cobbled together picture, that's a genuine picture there. So anyway, you can see there the QR code. So if anyone's interested, you can actually use that QR code on the Amazon advert or any other advert to see our videos. So if you're interested, you can see videos now and see what it's all about. So there's one particular video that I'd recommend that people watch if they're interested to see what it's all about. So one of the things that I needed for the book was some scientific validation that these spirits we're seeing on camera really are spirits. So I know skeptics say that the camera's just being fooled. It's not really seeing spirits. It's just picking up on shapes in the room or wherever it's looking. But I did manage eventually to get the Society for Psychical Research involved, and they're the oldest organization in the world that was set up to look for evidence of life after death. And they do investigations into things like hauntings and what have you. And they generally, if they do that, they send out two of their investigators to investigate a case. Well, I got onto the society having been recommended to them by the world famous biologist and author Dr. Rupert Sheldrake. I've been reading books of his about all sorts of psychic things, psychic abilities of animals and people, and all sorts of experiments he's done, which have been backed up with other scientists. And I was amazed at what I was reading, and he's got some amazing theories which seem as though they could be true, you know, of consciousness and how one animal can communicate with another or human via, you know, brain waves and stuff. And it explains a lot, you know, how birds can fly in flocks without bumping into each other, and fish can swim in shoals, and it's not explained in any other way. You know, it's not their sort of normal brains working, and their reactions would be too slow to explain that. So he's got all these amazing theories, and they seem as if they could be true. And I asked him to validate this, what we were seeing on the SLS camera, and he said, "No, I don't do that. That's not me." And he put me onto the Society for Psychical Research, and eventually I got in touch with an investigator. He was a PhD parapsychology student who was a member of the SPR, and he was on the Spontaneous Cases Committee, and he was interested in the case of Roger. And eventually he came up to see us for the weekend and see all the videos and that, but he hadn't been able to find a colleague to come with him. There was no one available or no one who would do it. So he came up by himself. So although they normally investigate in pairs, he came up and investigated Roger in a more of a personal capacity, but he is an SPR member and he is on the Spontaneous Cases Committee, but he was the best we could get. But anyway, he came up and he saw the videos, saw Roger, and Roger was appearing to him on the camera while he was there, but he was taking all his notes and that. And he was sort of interested, but he wasn't 100% convinced. And over the next 18 months or so, I said to him, you know, Aaron, you know, what would it take for you to believe or accept that this really is a spirit that the SLS camera's seeing? Because as you can see now, in our house, we've got fancy wallpaper, we've got furniture everywhere, and so the camera is always perhaps possibly being confused by what it's seeing, you know, and that's mistriggering, so skeptical say. So Aaron said, well, if we saw the spirit show up in, say, a totally neutral room, maybe a totally white room with plain white walls, no pattern to them, and if the spirit then shows up on the camera, then I would accept that it really is a spirit that the SLS is seeing. So I sent Aaron an SLS camera for him to assess. Had a brand new box one, even though they're obsolete. I sent him one and said, you know, you see what you make of it, do all your sort of assessments of this, and then when you're ready, we'll meet up and we'll do this thing in a white room somewhere. So eventually, at the university where he was studying, Northampton University, which seems to specialize in parapsychology and other things, eventually he booked a room over the Easter holidays, and when there's very few people around, we went down and we met, and he had his camera that I'd sent him, and he'd done lots of tests on it already, and I took mine, and we were going to do a number of side-by-side tests, see if the two cameras saw the same thing, and a whole load of tests, which I don't know exactly what he'd got planned, but I just went along with whatever he wanted to do. So while we were setting up in this room, he's sat at a table making all his copious notes on everything, and I said, "You carry on here and doing that. I'll turn my camera on, and I'll look, and I'll see if Roger's here," because I had obviously told Roger what I was doing, and obviously didn't need to tell Roger. He knew what we were doing, but basically he seems to come wherever I am with the camera. He'll show up, and I didn't know if he would show up here, which is 150 miles from my home, and I thought he would, but you can never be certain, can you? So I turned the camera on and looking around for Roger, and anyway, after 30 or so minutes, he still hadn't shown up on the camera, and I'm starting to get a bit worried, because normally the camera is very good, but as with all computers, because the camera is basically a very clever electronic camera full of electronics, and then it uses a very sophisticated bit of software on a tablet computer to sort of have the full business. That's the Microsoft bit that puts the stick figure on and recognizes when there is something in its shot. And they were designed for seeing physical human beings, and they would put a stick figure on that, and it would be for use in a computer game. But anyway, these cameras they can see an invisible spirit, so people who believe, like me, think, and it uses a lot of very clever software to do that. But occasionally, as with all computers, they go wrong occasionally, and you don't always know it's not seeing the spirits, because everything looks normal on the screen, but you just don't see the spirit. So I turned the computer off and restarted it when Roger hadn't shown up after 30 minutes. And then a few minutes after turning it back on again, getting it going again, suddenly I can see a stick figure showing up on this plain white wall. And I say to Aaron Lomas, the investigator, I said, Roger has shown up, he's on the wall next to you. And I said, you stay sat where you are, I'll keep filming, and then when I've finished and Roger goes, disappears, whatever, then I said, I'll show you the video and you see what you make of it. But I said, he's still here, and he showed up for about 4 minutes or something like that, until he moved in front of Aaron's desk where there was all sorts of stuff in the shot. And then that's when skeptics might say, well, it's the camera being tricked by all the stuff in the background. But for 4 minutes, Roger is there as a stick figure showing up on a totally plain white wall. So I say to Aaron, is there anything else you need me to do while he's showing up to convince you that that's a spirit? And he says, no, that's it. So at that point, Aaron conceded that this camera really is seeing spirits, and I knew that was Roger. So that was all the scientific vindication I needed. And there's a chapter in the book about this, about the SPR and all the work that Aaron did, and confirming that is a spirit that the camera is seeing. So we ended up with all the evidence we needed. So in the end, I got a third medium involved, and she was a medium in America. I'm not sure whereabouts in America, but she's a fantastic medium called Liz Murphy. So each of the have you heard of her? She's amazing, and it was strange how we got in touch with her. Caroline was buying some stuff on eBay, I think it was, knitting patterns or something, and it was from this Liz Murphy person, and Karen was buying this knitting stuff, and then suddenly she got a message from this Liz Murphy saying, I'm stopping doing the knitting, I'm actually becoming a medium now, a full-time medium, setting up my own business. And she explained why, and she offered us a free reading, offered Caroline a free reading. So Caroline went for that, and we had this reading. But the first time we met Liz Murphy, Caroline hadn't told her that we were that I would be filming in our living room here in the UK while they were having this internet conversation, and Liz was giving a reading. She didn't tell Liz that I was going to be using my equipment in the UK to film it and see if Roger and Joan showed up as spirits in our living room. Anyway, I think they did show up, but maybe not very well. But whatever it was, after the event, we told Liz Murphy that we'd been using this equipment. And Liz was really upset with us because we hadn't told her we were going to do this. And I don't blame Liz, because I said to Karen, you ought to tell her that we're going to use the equipment. But Karen said, no, if nothing happens on the equipment, then it's silly to have told her. And if something does happen, then we'll tell her and take it from there. So that's what happened. And Liz was very upset. And I was really disappointed because I thought Liz was really good. She came out with some great readings, and we'd sort of blown it really. We'd upset her, and I fully understood why. So there was another really world famous American medium who I thought, I'll try and get a reading with this woman, and if that works, then that'll be great for the book. That'd be fantastic evidence. So eventually I got this other medium to give us a reading, and it was quite expensive. It's £500, I can't remember, sort of $700 or something, I forget exactly. Anyway, we had this reading with her, and I had told her I was going to use the equipment, but I don't think she'd listened. Anyway, we had the reading with her, and it was terrible. It was not a good reading at all. It wasn't Joan and Roger. I don't know who it was, if it was anyone, but anyway, this medium really shattered my illusions that she was good, and maybe this was a one-off bad one, I don't know. So I was really disappointed, and when I told her I'd used the equipment, she got really stroppy and that, and so we went back to Liz Murphy and said, really sorry, about what happened when we hadn't told you we were using the equipment, and told her we'd had this reading with this top woman medium in America, and said it had all gone wrong. She was no good for us, and Liz Murphy was really good at this point, and she said, I understand. And I said, would you try giving us another reading, and we'll be upfront with you this time. We'll use the equipment. And by this time, I think it was about a year later after the first incident with her, she was really helpful and positive. And she said, yeah, I'll do a reading and we'll see what happens. And we did that. And it was fantastic. And so that reading went so well. So Joan and Roger were showing up on the SLS camera in our living room, and they were both sat with Caroline on the settee while she's having this reading with Liz Murphy on her iPad. Joan and Roger just sat there for about an hour, while this reading goes on, and they're just sort of there in the room on the SLS camera. And Liz is coming out with some great readings, and the one from Joan was particularly good, but the one from her dad Roger was also good, but her mum Joan there was this great reading from her, and Liz is saying things to Caroline like, I can see your mum surrounded by children, did she have lots of children, and Caroline saying, no, she didn't, they're just Alison and I don't know what that is. And then suddenly it hit her, and she said, oh yeah, mum was a nursery nurse, she worked with children, she loved children, she was surrounded by children in her job, and that's what you're getting. And she came out with all these amazing things Liz Murphy did from Joan, and they were obviously so spot on. And Liz said to Karen, she said, if you see butterflies, that's your mum, that's Joan giving you a message. And that is what we found, and that's right. So when we see butterflies, we know that's Joan. And the thing with feathers, that's common, isn't it, as a sign? And we used to get that a lot with Joan, feathers in the house and strange places where you wouldn't expect them, and we knew that was Joan. And obviously we'd had our bird sign from Joan. That was lovely. So anyway, Liz Murphy was fantastic. So she's got a chapter in the book, and then there's the video to go with it. It's quite a long video, but it's so fascinating because Liz describes how she functions as a medium, the pictures she sees that she gets from the spirit, from the person in the afterlife. And she explained why she became a medium. A school friend got cancer and died, and Liz suddenly thought, blimey, that's young, that's a shock, and that made her reassess her whole life and decide to become a medium. She'd had some things that made her realize she had some ability, and she developed it, and she's a fantastic medium. So yeah, there's 3 mediums in the book, and they've all got their different angles on this whole thing, and they've all brought us amazing things from Joan and Roger. They've all confirmed that Joan and Roger are there with us, and they've basically confirmed that the spirits we're seeing on our SLS camera are Joan and Roger that we're seeing. And as I've said, Roger loved his electronic gadgets, so it's entirely appropriate that Roger would come to us using electronic gadgets. And people might think, this book can't be a serious book about the afterlife if it's got gimmicky ghost hunting equipment in it. But, the reverse is true. It is a serious book, and it's Roger using what he can do, electronics. He can manipulate that, and he can show up on the SLS camera. So as far as the SLS camera goes, I don't think he is manipulating it. The camera really is seeing invisible spirits, and skeptics think they don't work, but they do. So I've got a great scientist friend in America, Mark Wentz, and he's written an endorsement for the book, and he's very well up on SLS cameras, and he sort of helps to describe how they work and how they function. And I know that the camera sends out 1 million infrared dots, and the camera can sense humans or spirits up to about 12 feet distance. So 1 million infrared dots up to 12 feet away, each dot is only about 3 millimeters away from the next dot. So somehow it can sense if these infrared dots, when they're reflected back or whatever, the camera can sense if the dot is moved out of position at all. So if there's an invisible spirit there, which, everyone seems to accept a spirit is some form of maybe electrical energy, or it can influence electrical energy. So if these infrared dots are fractionally displaced, then the camera can sense that they've been moved slightly out of position, and it can then sense that there's something there, even though it's invisible to our human eyes. And as far as I can work out from all the books I've read, the air is full of water vapor, and water is a polarized molecule, which, means it's affected by electrical fields. So if there's a spirit there, and maybe these water molecules are slightly displaced, then this camera can sense that. It can sense maybe the water vapor or whatever in the atmosphere has got slightly moved out of position. It knows there's something there, and therefore it puts a stick figure on it, and then it knows that's a spirit. So yeah, all the electronics backs up that this really is a spirit there. So Joan and Roger are there showing up on camera, and they're telling us, we're here in the afterlife, and you can see us on this equipment that can show where we are. So Joan and Roger are confirming, one, that there really is an afterlife, and you can see us here on the camera, and we're confirming that the afterlife is real. So really what they're saying, Roger is definitely saying, is, I was wrong. There is an afterlife, and I'm here to tell you I was wrong, and I can show you that I'm here. So that's proof beyond all doubt that there's an afterlife. And he's really confirming what all the religions have told us over the years, which most of us perhaps, or some of us, don't fully believe, because it seems too amazing. There really is life after death. So it's effectively saying we do live forever, and it seems to be the consensus that we are spiritual beings, and every so often we come to earth and live a physical life, and then we die, and then we're back to the spirit world, and then that repeats. So this is what life is all about. So we're spirits, and every so often we're here on earth as physical beings where we learn things. It seems that a physical life is a good learning experience. It's like a laboratory where we have all our learning experiences in the physical world, and then we lose our physical body and go back to the spirit world. So Joan and Roger just confirming, yeah, all religions are right. We live forever, and you can see us here in the spiritual world, and they're here, they're with us, and they come and they guide us. They're watching over us all the time, even though we don't know they're there. But the amazing thing is they can come and go freely. They're not trapped here on earth. They go to wherever they are, and then we just think of them, and suddenly they appear. Suddenly they're with us because we've thought of them. So yeah, it's an amazing story, and it's all true. and they're telling us all that it's right. There is an afterlife, and you can see us on camera in this afterlife. So it's phenomenal. So I hope some of your listeners might be impressed and might read the book when it's out, and hopefully they'll tell others about it. So anyone who's interested, there is a website where you can get all details of all our social media, etc. So the website is aliveintheafterlife.co.uk, and then we're on Facebook and we're on Instagram, and Caroline, my wife, does all the social media. But as I say, that is what you're seeing now is the front cover of the book, and the QR code there will get you to all the videos to watch. You can freely watch them now if you're interested, and see partly what it's all about. But when the book comes out, then it obviously goes into much greater detail, and all the things I mentioned, I've just touched on all the things, so there's a lot more detail in there. So hopefully your lovely listeners will be inspired to read up about it, and so yeah, there we go. So I hope I haven't bored people too much with it all. To me, it's fascinating. I'm still in awe of what Joan and Roger have done, and
Oh yeah.
can't really believe what they've done. But there you go. They did it, and it's all real. So,
All right. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
well, the first port of call probably is aliveintheafterlife.co.uk. There is on that, if you go to our website, there's a way to get in touch via email. So I've got an email address in there somewhere. I can't bring it to hand at the moment. So go to our website, and from there you can get to everything else. And I'd welcome any messages from anyone, anyone who wants to comment or ask any questions. The book also does describe, there's a whole chapter on all the equipment that we use, and I can tell you how we've done it and what seemed to work for us, what seemed to work for Joan and Roger. The equipment that I've described so far, I did try a whole load of other stuff, but Roger didn't seem to be able to use that, or didn't want to, I'm not sure. So lots of other ghost hunting equipment, spirit boxes and things of that nature. I tried that. I tried an Ovilus 5, which is a later version of the Ovilus 3. I've got a new one because they're making them again now, and Roger didn't seem to be able to use that. So I can tell you what worked for us, but everyone that wants to try it, do whatever you think seems right. The iPhone as a video recorder was a great starting point, and they're very effective. Roger didn't seem to be able to give us any EVPs, any electronic voice phenomena. I did say to him, why don't you say something and I might be able to record it and hear you talk, but he never seemed to be able to do that for us. But I know it works for other people.
Yeah.
And like K2 meter, some people say when there's spirit around, you get a higher reading. Well, with Roger, it doesn't seem to work like that. He doesn't give us a high reading all the time. It's only when he wants to flash the K2 meter, he'll make it flash. So, again, maybe that's just how he operates. I don't know, but
Well, it takes a lot of energy for them to manipulate things, and
yeah,
maybe not getting a full reading. That's the only energy he has. He may not even have the physical enough energy to even talk on a recorder for an EVP session.
yeah, I did come to that conclusion because a spirit can't be making a device read a high reading continuously. As you say, it's a lot of energy, isn't it? So Roger only flashes things when he has a reason to, or when he wants to, just. And I think maybe that's sometimes he doesn't show on the SLS camera for quite some time. Then he might only show briefly. And I have asked him, why are you not showing up? Because I think you're around. You're flashing the K2 meter, but you're not showing on camera. And I say to him, why is that? And sometimes he'll say on the Ovilus factors, and he does say that. And I think what he's telling me is, there's problems. I can't show up for some reason, perhaps like you say, he hasn't got the energy to show or something. And that's how I explain it. So yeah, there's a big chapter on the equipment. And if anyone's got any questions on how I've done the equipment or whatever, then that'd be great, because the SLS camera, I did buy the one from America, but since then it's completely changed. The first big problem I had was that the picture was always back to front, and apparently that's normal with these SLS cameras, so I've been told. And it took me a long while to be able to find out how to get it the right way around, because I just found it too confusing if it was inverted. I couldn't work out where the spirit was exactly, and I asked the company I bought the camera from in America if they could get the picture the right way around, but they never got back to me, and I never managed to do it. I thought I could do it with software, and I didn't. But in the end, I ended up with a separate monitor screen where you could invert the picture and get it the right way around, and that's how I do it, and that's
Yeah,
worked great for me.
because I own one as well. Mine's the same way. It's inverted.
Is it?
Yep.
Yeah, when I first started, with a small screen and the picture back to front, it was so confusing, and my brain wasn't quick enough to think, oh, that's where the spirit is, because I'm trying to compute in my mind exactly where it is, and it was just a problem for me. So I needed the picture sorting out, which I did. But yeah, there's all these little ins and outs. So anyone who's trying to do something similar, you'll go with your gut. I found that's what I did anyway. I went with my instincts, so tried things, and if it didn't work, I think, okay, well, that's not working, so I'll try something else. And what we ended up with is what suited us, what suited Roger, and even though Joan was the one that started off giving us all these signs, Roger took over, and that's exactly how they were in life. Roger would tend to be the more dominant one. Joan would be more in the background. That's how it is now. And Joan doesn't show up as much, and I think that's how she would have been. She wouldn't perhaps talk so much. Roger would do most of the talking, but if there was a reason to, then Joan would stick around. That's how she is now. If there's a reason, she'll show up on the camera as well. But generally, it's normally just Roger. But yeah, Roger loved his electronics and he loved his books, so it's inevitable that this book would happen how Roger wanted it, and it has. So I'm just so amazed at what they've done. It's just so incredible, and yeah, hopefully some of your viewers and listeners will be equally inspired as we've been. So I just thank you so much for this opportunity to tell everyone about them, and it's been fantastic. So I really appreciate it.
We'll have to do a part 2.
Sorry?
We'll have to do a part 2.
Yeah. Whenever you want, I'd be keen. If there's any more things, maybe some things will come to light. You might have a load more messages from people, and if there's anything new that we can bring to it, then yeah, part 2 would be excellent. So yeah, that'd be lovely. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get ready to wrap up. I'm gonna put you backstage for a minute, close the show out, and then I'll be right with you.
Okay, right. Okay.
Thank you guys for tuning in tonight. Before we end the show, we got to run the commercial again, and then I got to plug another flyer for a buddy of mine.
I sing out loud, my voice lifts hearts. Tucker House proud when the music starts. Sawyer plays the keys, soul through sound. Carson's guitar shakes the ground. We're the dream team, and we love to sing. Tucker backs us up. He's such an amazing pup. He keeps the rhythm.
There's the commercial. Make sure you check out those books for your children and schools, libraries. There must have. They sent me a couple copies. I checked them out. They're pretty awesome books for your kids. Also, my buddy Richie King. If you're in local Missouri, and come check out his comedy show. It's for the vets. All the money goes to the veterans, and he helps veterans with PTSD and stuff like that. So come check him out. Richie's the guy on the bottom corner. He was on the show a couple weekends ago. So Be sure to check that out. Um, so without further ado, definitely check out Jeremy's book when it comes out. Um, Go back to the replay and you can scan the QR code with your phone and go to his videos if you want to check out the videos. With that being said, tune in tomorrow night. My dad and I will both be on tomorrow night, 8 o'clock Central. We are going to be talking about the black-eyed children spirits. So that's going to be an interesting one. So tune in tonight, and remember, if you guys are being bullied in the paranormal field, you do have a voice. Nobody's better than anybody in this field. We're all after the same common goal to prove the existence of life after death. So with that being said, everybody have a good night, and we will see you tomorrow night, same time, same channel. So everybody have a good night, and God bless.